He was wheeled away with trembling hands, whispering one final goodbye to the loyal dog resting beside his bed. No one expected the animal to understand, but hours later, the hospital would be shaken by something no one could explain, and it all began with a dog's desperate cry. The quiet hum of hospital machines filled the sterile room like background static. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, but his eyes were focused elsewhere on the shaggy black and brown figure curled silently at the foot of the hospital bed. For 7 years, the dog had never left his side. Not through illness, not through heartbreak, not even through homelessness. They had weathered it all together. And now, as the nurse adjusted the four-drip and whispered instructions, the man felt the unbearable weight of something unspoken. This might be the last time. He leaned forward slowly, pain visible in the tight clench of his jaw. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears tilting slightly. No wag, no bark, just eyes, deep, dark, and alert. Almost human. "You know, right?" the man whispered, his voice cracking under the pressure of his words. He stroked the dog's head slowly, thumb brushing over the familiar scar above his ear, a mark left years ago when the dog had taken a hit meant for him during a home invasion. "I don't know if I'm coming back from this." The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared, unblinking, as if absorbing every word and every ounce of the man's pain. A nurse lingered by the door, but didn't interrupt. Even she sensed the gravity of the moment. Some things, some goodbyes shouldn't be rushed. The man had been battling a rare heart condition for 3 years. At first, it was just fatigue. Then came the breathlessness, the hospital visits, the medication regimes, and then came the option: high-risk surgery with a narrow window of success, or wait for the inevitable. For weeks, he had wrestled with the decision, but it was the way his dog had begun to follow him more closely, sleep beside him more protectively. That finally convinced him. The dog knew time was running out. He always knew. As the gurney arrived to take him to the operating room, the atmosphere grew heavier. The man gripped the dog's head with both hands, burying his forehead gently against the animal's. No one spoke. Even the nurse, who had seen 100 patients come and go, looked away to hide the tears welling in her eyes. "I love you, buddy," he murmured. "If I don't come back, thank you for all of it." Still, the dog didn't whimper. He didn't move, but his body trembled subtly, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a service dog or a therapy animal. He was just loyal, and he understood in the way only a creature with no words could understand, through stillness. As the hospital staff wheeled the bed away, the man's hand trailed behind him, fingers grazing the air as if unwilling to let go. The dog stood now frozen, as if deciding whether to follow. One step forward, then another, but a nurse gently held him back. "He'll be okay," she said, not knowing if she was lying. The dog sat back down, but his eyes never left the corridor where his human had disappeared. And that's when something shifted, something so subtle most would have missed it. His breathing changed, shallow and fast. His ears twitched, not in response to sound, but to absence. And though his human was gone from sight, his soul wasn't. Back in the operating room, the man's heart monitor began its slow rhythm under the beeping guidance of machines. Surgeons worked in focused silence, speaking only when necessary. But the dog, still waiting in the hospital hallway, had already entered a state of waiting that defied logic. He didn't eat the treats offered. He didn't rest. He simply sat in that same spot for hours, his gaze never moving from the hallway entrance, as if some invisible tether still bound him to the man behind those steel doors. To onlookers, it was just a dog. But to those who watched longer, something felt different. It was in his eyes, how they scanned every face that walked through the doors, how they looked past doctors and nurses as though searching for a soul he could still feel. And as the hours dragged on and the skies outside turned from afternoon blue to dusk orange, a chilling thought echoed through every heart that saw him there. What if he knows something we don't? The final goodbye hadn't been loud. It hadn't involved tears or theatrics. It had been still, quiet, a shared silence that said more than words ever could. And that stillness, that silent understanding, was now rippling through the sterile walls of a hospital that had seen thousands of goodbyes, but never one quite like this. It was just after 2 a.m. when the rain began to fall. The city slept under a heavy sky, its streets glazed in silver as thunder. Rolled somewhere in the distance, in a small neighborhood just 5 miles from the hospital, a dark silhouette moved quietly in the shadows. No one saw him leave. No one heard the door open or the fence creak. But by the time the family realized he was gone, the gate was swinging in the wind and the dog was nowhere to be found. Back at the house, the man's sister, who had been tasked with watching over the German Shepherd, panicked when she found the back door slightly ajar. She hadn't opened it. No one had. The dog was old now, not as agile as before. And yet somehow he was gone, vanished into the night as if guided by something far stronger than instinct. She grabbed a flashlight, searching the backyard and nearby street with growing dread. But deep down, part of her knew he hadn't run away. He was going to something. Just miles away, a nurse stood outside the intensive care unit, sipping coffee and rubbing tired eyes when she saw it. At first, just a blur of movement near the hospital entrance, a soaking wet figure limping across the parking lot. Then came the scratching, not loud, but desperate. Then the howls, raw, haunting, unlike any sound heard before inside those clinical walls. The security guard on duty approached the door slowly. Confused, he recognized the dog from earlier that day, the same German Shepherd that had sat quietly beside the patient before surgery. Now he was filthy, bleeding from his front paw, shivering in the cold. "Where did you come from?" the guard whispered. The dog pushed past him before he could react, slipping through the automatic doors with a burst of silent urgency. Cameras later revealed the chaos that followed. The dog, now dripping wet on the hospital tiles, sniffed the air furiously and moved with laser focus past the front desk, past the waiting area, down the main corridor and toward the ICU. He didn't hesitate, as if pulled by an invisible string. Nurses tried to stop him. Of course, hospital protocol didn't allow animals in patient areas, especially not unregistered, bleeding ones. But every time they tried to redirect or remove him, he resisted with a strength no one expected. Not violent, but unrelenting. He clawed at the floor, whimpered at the ICU doors, his nails tapping against the linoleum like a ticking clock. Something was happening inside the operating room. The mood had shifted. The patient's vitals had become unstable. His heart, which had been responding well, now struggled against an unforeseen complication. One of the surgeons would later describe it as an invisible resistance, as if something emotional had surged beneath the surface. The monitors beeped erratically. Staff scrambled. Nurses ran for emergency medications. The man's heart rate dropped and for a few terrifying seconds flatlined. But at that exact moment, marked to the second in hospital records, the dog outside the operating room collapsed. Security guards found him lying silently against the metal doors, his nose pressed against the cool surface, chest heaving, eyes wide but unfocused, no longer trying to get inside, just waiting. That's when the beeping resumed inside the OR. Slowly, weakly, but it came back. The flatline reversed. The man's heart began beating again, weak and irregular, but alive. No one could explain it. There had been no medication administered in those critical seconds, no physical intervention, just silence and then sound. The attending nurse who had helped prepare the man for surgery stood in the hallway when they wheeled him out hours later. His face was pale, his eyes barely open, but he was breathing alive. She turned to look at the dog still lying against the ICU doors. His fur was soaked, his paws raw, but his ears perked the moment he heard the wheels of the gurney approach. The man's eyes fluttered open, lips too dry to speak. But then, with effort, he mouthed something. One word, the dog's name. The nurse swore, his vitals strengthened in that moment. The dog, exhausted beyond recognition, rose shakily to his feet, took 2 steps forward, and laid his head gently across the man's chest. Right above the healing scar beneath his hospital gown, nobody said a word. Nobody dared to interrupt. It was as if something unseen had stitched them back together. A loyalty deeper than time, stronger than logic, unshaken by doors, distance, or even death. He hadn't just escaped that night. He had felt something pulling him, something human, something pure. He crossed fences, streets, cold rain and sharp gravel, Not to run away, but to find his human, to be there when he felt he was needed most. And perhaps in that brief, miraculous moment where life flickered like a candle in the wind, his presence was the very thing that called it back. The next morning arrived with fragile sunlight breaking through a blanket of fog, soft and hesitant, like a world waking up from a heavy dream. Inside the hospital's recovery wing, whispers traveled faster than charts or alarms. Every floor had heard by now. Not about a medical miracle, not exactly, but about a dog, a soaking wet, bleeding German shepherd, who somehow made it inside during a stormy night and collapsed just as his owner flatlined, and who was now resting silently at the foot of the man's hospital bed. No one had the heart to move him. He hadn't caused damage. He wasn't a threat. And in that moment, he didn't seem like an animal at all. He seemed like something more, something sacred, a guardian. Inside the room, the beeping of monitors had returned to a steady, cautious rhythm. The man had made it through the night, barely. Surgeons later said they didn't know how. One of them, a hardened veteran with 30 years of trauma experience, admitted he had no medical explanation for how the patient's heart restarted after the flatline, with no drugs, no shock, no direct intervention. "I'm not religious," the doctor had whispered to a nurse, "but something happened in that room last night, and that dog was part of it." As the sun rose higher, visitors were finally allowed into the recovery area. The man's sister was the first to arrive, red-eyed, clutching a coffee cup in trembling fingers. When she entered the room, she gasped. Not because her brother was alive, not just because his vitals were improving, but because the dog was already there. She dropped the cup. Hot liquid spilled across the floor tiles as she rushed forward, blinking back. Shock. "I locked the door," she whispered. "I locked it. The gate, the back door." "How did he?" The nurse beside her simply nodded toward the bed. "Ask him." Her brother stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering under the weight of sedation, and then slowly, painfully, he opened his eyes. They were unfocused at first, dancing along the ceiling, searching for meaning. Then they locked on one thing, or rather one soul, the dog. His lips trembled, not from pain, not from anesthesia, from recognition. "Buddy," he croaked, barely audible. The German shepherd, who had been completely still, suddenly stood up, stepped forward, and placed his head ever so gently across his owner's chest, right over the healing heart. And the man, against every logical expectation, smiled weakly, softly, but unmistakably. That was the moment that broke the silence in the room. His sister let out a choked sob and clutched a tissue to her mouth. The nurse backed into the hallway to compose herself. Even the security guard outside, who had seen it all unfold overnight, turned away, hiding the glimmer of emotion behind a cold, professional stare. But it wasn't over yet. Over the next few hours, something began to happen that no one could fully explain. The man's vitals, though still delicate, began to stabilize faster than expected. His body responded to treatment with greater sensitivity. His speech returned more quickly than most post-op patients. When asked how he felt, he answered only one way, like he brought me back. Doctors ran their numbers again, rechecked timelines. Some speculated the dog's presence may have eased the man's stress during the most critical window. Others thought it was coincidence, but not the nurses, not the ones who watched the shepherd sit motionless for 6 hours during surgery, refusing food or water, ears tilted toward the ICU, body rigid like a soldier on watch, and certainly not the family. They believed something passed between them, something invisible, something no scan or X-ray could detect. Later, when asked why the dog had left the house that night, the sister could only shake her head. "It's like he heard something we didn't," she said, "like he was called." 1 week later, the man was stable enough to be discharged into home recovery. The hospital allowed the dog to ride in the transport van with him against protocol, but no one questioned it. As the van pulled away from the hospital, the dog laid his head on his owner's lap the whole way home, never moving. The man, still pale and healing, whispered softly the whole ride, telling him thank you, telling him he was sorry for saying goodbye. "I didn't mean forever," he said. I didn't know." The dog didn't need an apology. He had always known better. Moral of the story, Sometimes the deepest loyalty doesn't come from words, promises, or reason. It comes from a silent bond, one that transcends doors, distance, pain, and even death. In a world obsessed with logic and facts, this story reminds us that love, pure, loyal, and unconditional love, can defy science. The kind of love that listens when no one is speaking, that shows up when everyone else has given up. And that saves us, not just with action, but with presence. Because sometimes just being there is enough to bring someone back. See you in next video.